Available.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for making time in your week out of sight of the regular schedule. Let's, I guess, just get going. Ben, did you want to do a preamble for us here?
Yeah, I will. We've continued the deliberation of the discussion for this shoreline substantial development permit. Part of that preamble, I will turn over to Ken to talk about the appearance of fairness doctrine. We need to make sure that there haven't been any issues that have crept in since the last meeting, and then also some guidance on how to deal with public comment since the public hearing has been closed. Ken?
So if you recall, one of the questions I posited for the council members regarding appearance of fairness is whether any of you had conversations with either proponents or opponents of this project, since the decision has to be based upon the record. I need to know again whether any of you have had conversations with either proponents or opponents of the project, and if so, disclose the nature of the conversation. Anybody? Heads shaking, no heads nodding. I think that answers my question. So I would say no, and that is really what I need to know for appearance of fairness. So that's it. And then I'd ask again, is the proponent or is the applicant on the line? Is he present?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, well, normally I would ask the applicant if they have any new objections, but not being present, then I guess I can't really ask anybody that. So the answer is probably no. All right, thanks.
Has anybody heard, Leon, have you heard from Paul?
I have not, no. And I'm trying to go stream the meeting via YouTube and it's not working right now. Just a heads up on that. But we're recording.
Okay. All right, Ben, I guess keep it going.
Yeah, so just FYI, we have been in contact with the applicants throughout the day today and sent them the meeting information. So their attendance isn't for lack of communicating there. The issue is the same thing, the shoreline substantial development permit proposal that was reviewed just last Thursday. The materials you have here are a little bit different than last time, and we tried to accommodate the request to have it easier to toggle through. What we've got is just references to the page number to each of the attachments. And I've ordered those attachments based on where I think they could come up in the discussion. And that discussion would be based on the staff report that I submitted. That staff report only anticipates 6 real decision points being made. There's likelihood that there's many more than that. I just didn't capture any other specific ones based on the discussion of the last time. So we can dig deeper into anything if we want. Again, we'll take it slow. We'll take it one thing at a time and make sure that we can get through this. So that first staff report introduces those decision points. The way the questions are framed there with those decisions is to just be, if you guys all answer yes, or there's consensus yes, then we don't need to deal with that question anymore. We don't need to look at draft language. We can move right on to the next one. That's not to say that saying yes is a good thing. It's just, that's how process moving through from question to question. Then the staff report goes on into those 6 questions. Within there are 2.5 alternative conditions that we could consider, and if the initial yes isn't, we don't go with that. It then talks about other discussion items that were brought up at the last meeting, but I didn't know how to frame it as a question, so I didn't want to lose those as being brought up. And then it goes into some specifics for the permit itself with how it's constructed and how there could be some supplements that you asked me to make at the end to organize the conditions at the end of the document, and add anything that we adopt by reference. So it concludes with possible motion there. Does that make sense as a way to process through the review?
Does to me. And Paul, you have your packet?
Not yet. I got behind. I'll have it open in a minute.
Very good.
I guess, Ben or Scott, if I could ask a couple of, so we can process through. I've sort of grouped my issues. I mean, I tried to sort of do it through the permit application, but then I've got some buckets of stuff that I just need to talk about that don't really fit into that permit application. So I don't know if you want me to sort of go through mine and then we go, okay, stop, wait. I don't want to get to page 87 when I'm on page 12 or whatever.
Okay. Well, why don't we start with your comments first then?
Okay. Couple of things. Just you'd mentioned there was new stuff sent out, Ben, but I couldn't figure out what was new. So I'm just looking at page 313, which is the, well, I guess I'll call the latest rendition of the project map. So first off, starting at the top, if they're going to put the stormwater facility right up off of Rock Cove, here's my concern, because we've had this happen on every development in Stevenson. Nobody ends up maintaining or being responsible for it, despite the fact that we make that the developer's responsibility. Angel Heights goes away. Hidden Ridge goes away. Shenandoah goes away. All of a sudden, we've got nobody who then is responsible for that. So I'm not sure how we're going to take care of that. And then coming through the project, I see they've got one garbage collection area, but they didn't identify any mailbox or other areas that would be needed. Third, hammerheads, turnarounds for emergency vehicles. Carl, I didn't know if just looking at these drawings, are we okay with the way it's set up? Do we need additional information on that?
There's additional information on another application that our engineer and myself looked over, but it looks like, Robert, they're under all of the footages as far as a hammerhead. I believe it appears to me, that was addressed in the comments from our engineer. One of the hammerheads was, but it appears to me that they have enough room for it and will address it.
Okay, I just, again, I'm looking at the drawing. I see you go down to phase one, you got a fire at that last townhouse down there, past the garbage collection. I just don't see how you get back out of that. And two, are there going to be hot taps for some water lines put in? Are they going to put those in down there? Or are we going to be drawing water from the, street access?
So they've got a tap for a fire system, which includes a hydrant and risers at each of the individual, I guess you can call them fourplexes.
Fourplexes, yeah.
And then they have a separate tap for the potable water.
Okay. My understanding was they were going to water, are they going to do a single meter for water as well as electric? So they're going to be responsible for that? Okay.
Yeah, we don't do electric, but single meter. So our responsibility as a city would end there.
Again, that's, the way he's described it, I mean, he's not creating a phase one plan development with an HOA that's responsible for these, situations. It sounds like they're going to self-manage the project. And that's where I'm just worried, because if they're going to self-manage it and they go away like Mimi and everybody else has done in the various projects around here, we get left with an eyesore. While the city gets to say it's not our responsibility, it does look bad for our, residents. I mean, the one on Hidden Ridge, the one down at Angel Heights, it's just nobody takes care of it. Nobody's responsible for it, and the city's not.
So Robert,
yep.
At the planning commission meeting, they mentioned that they will be hiring a management company. They just don't have one yet. So
That's
they
great. They hire one, but they go away. If the developer goes away, that management company's not getting paid by anybody. So.
And
Well, some of the earlier developments preceded the Washington Common Interest Ownership Act. We now have more teeth under this new last year statute. It's in chapter 6490, 64.90. If you want to look at that over, Robert, it gives the local jurisdiction more teeth. I don't know how much you've dealt with that so far,
Yeah.
but it does solve some of the Hidden Ridge problems for the local jurisdiction and for the residents. When they create these things, for one thing, they have to create them, and the formation and continuation of these associations are now regulated by statute. So peruse that at your leisure, and that might solve some of those issues, but they will have to abide by that statute.
Okay. So I guess I'm sticking with the infrastructure right now just to see if there's any boxes that need to be checked or addressed. The Hammerhead emergency access, the stormwater facilities, responsibility after. Well, I guess, is the proposal that each townhouse will be deeded and have its own C of O, or are we going common wall?
It's all common wall.
Well, I get that, but are they going to so they're not going to sell the individual units? They're going to retain ownership of the fourplex?
I'm assuming that's what's always been talked about. I mean, it's going under review as they own the whole thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but it's all under one ownership.
He's shaking his head. I love it.
No, you're not wrong.
Yes.
One day they
I'm
may
not wrong.
sell off a
No, you're not wrong. Yes, you're wrong.
So, I mean, right here, I guess it's my understanding that I guess I mentioned at the first meeting, maybe I shouldn't use the term infancy, but we just reviewed on the utility side, Robert, the plan in this.
Okay.
Even if you guys agree upon whatever you agree upon tonight, what are we calling it, the shoreline? But anyways, it's not like whatever they've proposed is a done deal. That's a whole separate review.
Okay. All right, well then, I guess going back to the other buckets, the traffic issue, I'm okay with a caveat that they, it slows them down if they have to do one before they begin digging dirt on phase one. But if we require it to be done before C of O for the first building, Ben, is that possible?
Yes, it's possible. I drafted it. First
I
building.
saw the options that you
one.
put in there. What's that?
First building in phase one.
Yes, sir.
Certainly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Seems to
possible.
me then they got plenty of time and they can, be getting the impact study done while because they got to do the infrastructure and then they got to I assume they're going to go one building at a time. They aren't going to try to dig out and do foundations for 4 buildings. But
So Robert, not as familiar with this process as you are. Can you break that down, please? What you
yeah,
just
so
said?
the idea is with the impact study, we heard them say they're about 16 weeks out. So if we said to them right now, look, we're going to, one of our conditions is you have to have the impact study before you scratch earth, then that pushes them out about 16 weeks. But if what we're telling them is that, hey, we want the impact study, but we're going to give you time. Here's the breath. You can get that done while you start scratching earth. But what we hold as the carrot is we don't give C of O to the first building for occupancy until that's done. Now I say that we did that for JP's house with the road and we still got screwed. So
So, Robert, let me ask you this. Is there a potential in the traffic study that they might eat up some real estate in their plan with a turn lane?
I don't think it's there. I mean, again, if the impact study comes in and says they need either I don't know how you can widen Rock Creek at that spot to put
That's what I'm getting at.
lane.
They'd have to widen it on their property is what I would see.
Right. They'd have to bring it in and create a center lane for turn traffic coming, what do you call that, southbound there?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you're heading towards the river. So that would be the only thing I could see an impact study saying, hey, you're going to have enough traffic on here, especially with potential fire hall, that we're going to want you to put a turn lane in the center there. And that would screw them in terms of bringing it back, and they're going to cut into the sidewalk that's already there.
Well, there's storm drainage there as well.
Oh, yeah, the stormwater facility it could create, 10 feet for a turn lane? Bigger?
At least.
At least. So, yeah, and again, I don't want to hold them up, but if the, traffic study guy says they need that center turn lane, and that's kind of what we need to do.
Sure.
But that wouldn't affect their construction of the buildings. If they wanted to get in there, get the rock on the ground, start digging out a foundation, say they start in the back, I call it building 4 in the back, they could get going on that. I mean,
Okay,
they just
so-
may have to change their, I'm sorry, Scott.
Well, we talked briefly not even briefly, we talked about this morning. And Ben had some thought about looking at a traffic study before they could go on to phase 2, because phase 1 is just those 16 units. So I'm not sure how many cars we're talking about. It's the additional phases that bring in common areas and promoting outdoor events. So that was one thought. The other question I had is, I did read the WashDOT comments, and their scope of study, they want to go all the way past the interpretive center and look at that area by the where the lodge comes in. So if we have the ability to say we're not interested in your need for a study, can we change that scope too? Can we just limit it to well, how do we decide how far to extend if we don't go all the way to 14, how do you avoid being short-sighted in creating too shallow of a scope for the study?
The way I understand it is the only thing that would happen is if we agree to a permit that says they got to do the study, and we limit the study to Rock Creek, Rock Creek Drive, and we don't require anything about 14, WSDOT could challenge the issuance of that permit. The likelihood of that probably slim to none, but that would put the developer at risk. They're on notice that WSDOT has made this comment, but they haven't directed it be done. So we issue the permit. Is that right, Ben? We issue the permit. Next thing you know, WSDOT could come in and seek declaratory or injunctive relief to say, nope, you can't do your project as permitted by the city until you do this additional traffic study out on 14. That's my understanding.
Yeah, correct.
So it doesn't put us, the city, at risk. It puts the developer at risk. So we look like good guys with the developer. Hey, we we just want our study done here on Rock Creek Drive. And if the reason why I say C of O, the first building, is because I anticipate what they're going to want to do, which any good developer would, is get the first one up and start renting it, which is why I think they would start in the back. That's not always the case. They may start in the front, but as soon as that first fourplex has got C of O, they're going to start to put heads on beds so they can make money.
Yeah, just on the one thing about being challenged, it would be a challenge of our decision. So we'd be there defending our decision for WashDOT. So that's the risk involved there.
Yeah, I mean, I think our simple, and just like even Dean pointed out, is like, well, wait a minute, the lodge, they didn't require one for the lodge back in the 90s. They've certainly never required anything for the interpretive center. It's unfair, this development, that all of a sudden we got to go out to 14 and make adjustments on the state highway. But yeah, I mean, it could put their project on hold. So those are, yeah. Kind of going down on the list, then the question that, Paul, Matthew, I know Amy are more involved in the sort of pedestrian access is, one, is there going to be access during construction? 2, what kind of insurance do we want? And do we want city named as an additional insured on whatever policy that is, if somebody decides they're going to keep that trail or access area? I haven't walked that in a long time, so you guys know more about that than I do. So the question there is what are we going to require them to put up or name us on whatever policy that's necessary so that we've got protection there. So that was where I landed on my read over the 50 minutes or so I got on the project today.
Just let me summarize then. You have stormwater questions, especially long-term maintenance, garbage, postal, other services, hammerhead and engineering questions, the timing of the traffic impact study, and then insurance and potential maintenance of public access pathways.
Yeah. So just, an insurance during construction so that, whatever access,
Okay.
I mean, are they going to cut it off? I don't know if that's something that we're going to say, is that you can't go walk around there while there's construction. I assume we can't say that, but it's private property at that point other than the easement that's existing, right, Ken? Sorry, yeah, I got you on mute.
Fire that at me again. What was the question?
The idea is that it's private property, but there is a public easement access out there. So during construction, I don't think we can say, you know, no public access during construction. But
The question is whether it's an unreasonable interference with the easement. So
Right.
if they could build and even temporarily shut down areas of the easement, but they'd have to somehow accommodate the use of that easement, even if it's on a temporary basis, to make sure that the fundamental attribute of the easement can be met. So they'd have to somehow allow for that access, even during construction, although there may be areas that you wouldn't be able to reach, but they still have to meet really what's the spirit of the easement. Ultimately, they would have to restore the easement, though, before they're done, or else the city would have to allow that easement to be modified.
That's I clicked on page 144, council members, which shows the existing easement and then what they're proposing. I didn't see a lot of interference with phase one construction because it looks like that easement comes in at the north end of the property where it says proposed lot 5, and then it comes around and it looks like all that construction would be up in front. So if that's truly the access point, which I can't disagree with, and they go around the back of construction along that light blue line, and I don't see any. I don't see the construction interfering with the reasonable use of the public of that easement if that's the problem.
Robert, what page was that?
144. And then and 145, those two go together.
Hey, Robert, going over the notes, fire turnaround was addressed. Also a 15-foot easement was addressed, a requirement. Theirs was a little skinny on that. So that's been identified.
Okay.
And the plans that we got were preliminary.
Oh, yeah.
Let me try to address where those issues come up within the documents, and then see if we want to discuss it then or have separate discussions now. So the first thing you also asked was what was new information? And so
Yeah.
I'm looking at the agenda, and I'll go down through those lettered documents to show you what's new. So
Yeah, hang on. I didn't download the agenda. Hang on, I'm gonna pull it down real quick. I just pulled down the packet.
So I'm assuming then that the hammerhead and the turnaround is part of a different plan. We're asked to examine and approve the shoreline plan. Are we okay to talk about both items now, or are we supposed to keep them separate, or what's our obligation?
the way that it is drafted as a permit is that you trust Carl to make sure that everything that they're building is going to be built to the engineering standards. And so you don't have to discuss that. Same way that you're not discussing the type of construction. We're leaving that to Marlon as our building official to make those determinations.
Same with ADA. That'll be addressed in the building permit portion. Council doesn't need to make sure that's enforced. That's the ADA has already done a good job of that, and then Marlon needs to enforce that it's on the plans. So.
Chapter 11 of the IBC of the 2015.
So those lettered documents, A is new for you guys tonight.
Page 24.
Page 24 is new, and that goes on till page 28, looks like. And then we jump all the way down to H. Page 146 is new.
Hey, Ben, before you go back down, because that's I'd highlighted 25, 26 as being new. What is that? What is page 24, 25?
It's a draft denial if you guys would prefer to see affordable housing instead of a hotel project. This is a draft denial for you.
Gotcha.
Let's see, and then we go all the way down to T is the other new piece of information for you guys tonight. Everything else was in the packet last time in some form. Tried to call it out a little more specifically where I reference the documents in the staff report. So hopefully that's a little more helpful.
Thank you.
One of those that I want to highlight right now is O, and that's the city engineer, consulting engineers preliminary review of this. I don't have last Thursday's staff report, but in there I talk about they recommend something like 7 conditions on that. 4 of them are already included. And so whether or not you want to get involved to the extent to require the other 3 as part of this project or let that process play out in Carl and the engineering standards court is something for you guys to consider. The that O is where we are requiring the private ownership and maintenance of that facility. So that's where that comes from. There is no solution to the problem you're talking about in the with the other developments in town. One thing that I just put out there for you guys to consider, that in this case there's a profit motive behind it, where there's not in those residential developments. There's a dollar saving motive. In this case, there's the profit motive, which I don't know if that's sufficient enough to address the issue or the concerns about it, but something that differentiates this from the other ones.
I mean, the other thing I wanted to point out, Ben, just to dovetail on what you said too, is I think Amy, Paul, and Matt might be interested in O, which is on page 180. I'm sorry, N, which is on page 187. It's the proposed landscape plan.
Mm-hmm.
Showing the buffering and the vegetation. I didn't look at that much last Thursday. I tried to look at it a little bit more today, but I know that my brethren may have more comments or input on that.
Yeah, right on. Other areas where your issues are addressed, the requirement to screen things like the trash receptacles and other electrical equipment, mechanical equipment is there in the zoning code, but we don't have any specific requirement for including postal delivery, anything. It wasn't something that has been considered to this point. And if we want to make that requirement, let's talk more about that and develop some findings for that. The the timing of the traffic impact study, I definitely want to talk about some. They did submit a letter that gives what they call a traffic impact study. I'm not an engineer, and so I'm not going to challenge that too much. What that study does, though, is it really estimates trips generated by phase 1 of the project, and it does break it down into peak hour trips and just average trips for the day. It goes into some assumptions about the directions those trips would be going. But what it doesn't have is an analysis of the existing system to say whether those additional peak hour trips are going to reduce the level of service at an intersection or at a corridor. And so, it's got information that would be included in a traffic impact study, and they may try to hold that up to us to say that there's your study right there.
Yeah, again, though, that deals with just the 16 units there. It doesn't deal with the 15,000 square feet of venue space.
Okay.
And I think that's the more concern is that you get a weekend, I don't know, let's assume in a year or 2 years down there, they're doing Blues and Brews. You got a lot more traffic going through there than you do just for the 16 units. That may be a one-off, so it's not as big an issue, but they can do traffic control for that day or venue.
And then for the last one you bring up about the public access during construction, I wanted to point you to the draft condition on their number, I think it's 15, which is the same one we put on the Port of Skamania when they were doing their construction, that During construction, you need to fence that off to keep all the public safe from the construction activity and everything there. So
It's on page 15 or?
it's condition number 15. I'm scrolling down to.
Oh, okay, it's down, yeah, I see it. 9, 10, 11. Got you. It's on page 21. Thank you.
21. And so there would be a requirement to keep the public out of there during construction. If you don't want that, then we need to change that requirement, which is easily something we can do.
Ken, what is our obligation in terms of requiring additional insured riders, certificates for the city during construction, during the process?
Well, it's not typical.
Okay.
For as far as protecting the city in the right of way, is that what you're talking about?
I mean, the only reason why I bring it up is because of the easement. I mean, if it was solid private property and, you know, we don't have any right to be on there while they're constructing, then if they get hurt, it's their problem, it's not ours. But we do have this easement that exists.
I think you're right. To the extent they're interfering with the easement, even temporarily, we need to have them obtain a right-of-way license, and that right-of-way license would have indemnification and insurance language. Normally, you know, we wouldn't have that problem, but if they're obstructing the easement, then we would want indemnification and insurance. Also, we might need to have a construction management plan where they make clear what they're going to do with that easement area during construction for the safety of the residents, for the safety of the workers, just to make sure, you know, that everything is properly signed, that the alternative paths are reasonable, and so forth. So you're right.
I mean, my vision would be they have construction debris that ends up on the easement. You know, somebody goes on the easement, somebody gets hurt, their dog gets hurt, something like that. Next thing you know, they're on, you know, public easement, and we somehow didn't.
It's the same thing as if somebody was going to stage on our right of way. They would need to get our permission and in the form of a license, and then provide us with reasonable indemnification and insurance. Yes, same idea.
Okay. So Ben, I don't know where that fits in. That's something that we, you know, at least need to talk to Dean about that.
Is it me or
I think it's Ben and where he puts it in the permit, where that new blue language may show up.
Let me put this as a question out there to the group as a whole. So that condition 15 right now, which could anticipate just a fence going across the whole Rock Creek Drive frontage during construction that screens everything out. Is that unacceptable? And so I'm not framing it as a yes or no, or in the right way. So do you want to see that changed so that they maintain access to the easement, this legal easement? The other thing I want to bring into that discussion is that I don't know that I could go on the site and identify where that easement is, and it's certainly not a passable easement as it exists in the ground right now. So I don't know exactly what we would be protecting.
Hey, if I might, Ken, wouldn't it be the same as like the Russell Street project right now? We've got two, well, street right of way, two sidewalk right of ways. That is the contractor's responsibility to make that scene safe for pedestrian travel. Even, I mean, it's a lot of times it's blocked off after they pour concrete, right? So as of right now, I don't believe the city's on the hook if somebody goes past the barricade and falls in wet cement. And I don't believe the city to be on the hook for that.
I think there are going to be some OSHA regulations that regulate how they manage a construction site. I'm no great expert on OSHA, but I know that they are the hook for injuries related to their construction project from the general public. So they need to manage that site anyway. But if they're going to interfere with what has been a public easement, then I think they probably would need some kind of licensure from us. Now, you know, There's a little off the cuff, but that's the way I would look at it anyway.
If I could
How's
throw
your
in my
list
2
looking there,
cents.
Robert?
I think, again, just a couple of little tweaks, Ben, I went back to 1.9, which is on page 9. I still want to curb down the time that they can be constructed. 10 p.m. is a little late, especially with the assisted living next door. So it'd just be a red line change to put it, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll go back through my list here of the highlights I made. I don't want to take everybody's time. I feel like I'm sucking the oxygen out of this one.
That's weird.
If I was getting paid to do it, it'd be.
All right. So, do you guys want to work with Ben's format here and just start addressing these different discussion points?
I think it'd just be easiest.
Very good. Proposed use. You want to boil this down for us, Ben?
Yeah, this is responsive to Matthew's request to incorporate affordable housing into the project. And so in this proposal, it would be a distinct denial. It wouldn't be subject to all the conditions that we've been talking about so far. So the project as it's proposed, the use under the Shorelines Management Program is the use category hotels, motels, condominiums. Under the zoning code, that use would just be hotels. The affordable housing component would be a completely separate use from what's proposed. So under the zoning code, it would be the only way to get that permitted would be as multifamily dwellings. Under the Shorelines Management Program, it would be considered a residence and it's permissible. So you can permit residential uses if they had proposed that. However, the Planning Commission would have to propose it based on its approve it based on its location in the commercial recreation district. So I toyed with trying to include in there a condition that they obtain that permit from the Planning Commission, but then pulled back from that because it didn't seem like we could require the applicant to do something that they can't guarantee success of. So it's drafted here as a denial, and then it'd be a conversation with the applicants to say, yeah, that's great, but we really think that the appropriate use of this site is for residential uses, especially affordable residences. To give you guys something to stand on with that, I gave the study that the EDC just concluded, where there's 45% of the residences that we expect added in the next 20 years need to be at a level that's affordable to the local income. So I won't recommend you do this, but if you do it, I try to give you something to stand on in doing so.
And for me, it was more of a point of consideration if they did wind up needing some kind of variance. But I mean, it's the hotel's allowed in the area, and it's their property, so I wouldn't want to stand in the way of that. But I just kind of wanted it on the radar if anything came to planning for consideration.
Hey, Matt, that's interesting. Every time you go off mute, I get a dee, like a very large telegraph. Is that everybody else picking that up, or is that just mine? That's weird. It's just coming off of your audio too.
I'll call in.
Damn, I've been walking around trying to figure that out in both these meetings. I thought it was my house, like something chirping. Thank you so much.
It's when Matt goes
crazy.
It's funny because I'm trying to figure out what's creating it. What operating system would throw that out?
I thought it was like a ceiling fan or something.
There you go, Amy. Problem solved there.
All right. So decision point 1 seems to have been it's not a deal breaker. Where it's not going to be something that we're going to pursue at this time. I guess would be a good way of putting that. That sound about right? Okay.
For me, I'd say, yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
One thumbs up and one verbal and not a consensus. Yeah, another thumbs up. Okay.
All right, traffic impacts. How do you guys feel about the proposal? Do we call it a proposal, an idea that was kind of floated at the top of the order about it is expected that for it to be done before what was the threshold, Robert? What was the?
I think before C of O on their first building, you know, because I'm assuming they're going to bring them in one at a time. But
Can you tell me what that acronym stands for,
oh,
please?
certificate of occupancy. Sorry,
Okay.
when you can put the building to its intended use. Or when Carl walks by and goes, okay, yeah, if you can make the fire alarm work, then I'll let you go live in the house.
So here, one other thought to consider here. I know that Robert, you wanted to consider the fire hall. I have a lot of trouble doing that, making them consider the impacts of the fire hall on their development after it happens, because the fire hall isn't a development. And so with the alternative condition that we've drafted here, the timeline would be prior to future phases, at which point maybe we're far enough along with the fire hall where we don't have that issue, where this development could be an impact on our development instead.
Yeah, and I mean, they did give you the letter at page 130, whatever that is, 131, that at least gets them through the 16 buildings. So maybe whenever they're going to break ground on phase 2, because this is just a phase 1 permit. So I'd be okay with that.
And then the other thought that I had, just to add to your discussion, when we went through the vacation rental stuff, there was that big discussion about how much impact does a vacation rental have on the neighborhood? Does it have more impact than a single family residence or not? And a lot of the information that we gathered at that time that led to the decisions was that it doesn't have a greater impact than a single family residence. And some of the discussion then was also that because of vacancy rates, it may also have a lesser impact. And so I don't know up from down with the traffic engineers manual about what use they're proposing, but I would assume that these 16 units really do have a lesser impact than the commercial development they propose for phase 2.
Are you envisioning this more as Vacasa, Airbnb, Stay Fred? I've got several of these projects where they built them out for that reason. And I'm assuming, don't we have a standard that requires you to at least list with us if you're going to do that? You got to pay $10 a year or something. If you have a party in there, we have the right to send the cops over or whatever.
Yeah, all I can base my knowledge on really is what they've submitted in their narrative, which is in attachment number P, and I don't know the specific page there.
191.
Okay. Going from memory, they've considered doing this as what I'd almost call a timeshare, where they rent it out in the meantime. So in that case, they would need to go through the state's condo laws and potentially the new statute that Ken references, or potentially alternatively that new statute, to set that up so that there may be some sort of ownership group who has access to the unit and then rents it out when they're not there. I think that that's sort of the intent there, and how they think they'll make this project pencil.
Okay,
I'm
sorry,
sorry, go ahead, Scott. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
So you said, so now we're toying with condition 2 of item 2 prior to approval of any future phase. So before we approve phase 2, they'll have to submit that traffic study.
Or again, if they verify that 2-page letter that they submitted today satisfies the requirements, they'd be fine.
Okay, well, I'm trying to figure out how we move on to the next step here.
Well,
So
I have a question. Is it?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Is it condition 2 or 2A, or is it 2 in conjunction with and 2A?
That's up to you guys. So right now, the first question is the condition as it's currently drafted, which isn't reflected on this document. It's in the draft saying that you need to prepare that they need to prepare a traffic impacts study meeting WashDOT's intent and WashDOT's letter. And the timing of that one is scrolling, is prior to the start of construction of this phase that they need to do that. The alternative that I prepared for you guys before the meeting was this 2 and or 2A, well, 2 and 2A, or to include 2A based on some of the conversation that you had with the developer at the last meeting, that there may be a development agreement where we can agree to share some of the cost of some improvement. But we haven't identified what those improvements are at this point. So that's where 2A contemplates.
Ben, where is 2A in the packet? Because I'm on page 10, which is this 2.
Page 3.
Oh, page 3. Thanks.
At least that's where I'm looking at the breakdown. So is the big difference between the two of them scope of study
And timing.
Because what's that?
Timing is the big difference, that it's prior to approval of any future phase. So in this one, you get phase 1 without having to do that, or in the alternative. In the current draft, you're not getting approval of phase 1 until that happens. And that would be approval by you guys. So you would hold over the decision on this until that comes in.
Because I'm looking at condition 2 and it says, it lists Rock Creek Drive, intersections, adjacent uses, and termini at SR 14. I don't see similar language in 2A. And then the other language that I'm looking at is 2 says prior to approval of, prior to the approval of any future phase, where condition 2A is prior to occupancy of any future phase. So 2A would kind of stretch it out a bit more, it feels like.
If this helps on the scale of things, the lodge put a pavilion in last year, occupancy 181 people. No traffic study required. They've also built 4, I believe they're at 4 tree houses now. No traffic study required. I think it's just something that needs, just so you guys know, so you're prepared to see, you have that knowledge.
So Carl, when you say not required by us, was it a similar situation where WashDOT said we'd like it and the applicant said no thanks?
It was a simple building permit. Yeah, okay. It wasn't even, it was no requirement by the city at all. So if you think of 181 people coming at one time, no study was done. I don't believe we've seen an impact that I'm aware of, but I think it's just something to be aware of.
Okay.
It was more because they pieced it in rather than it being one whole unit at once, like proposed here.
I didn't catch the first part.
Is it just because they were piecing it together?
Yes. Yeah. There was no, the development's already there. They're building it on their own property. But the fact remains that there's still the potential for 180 people to gather at the same time.
Right. So it's almost they're being punished for being more forthcoming and providing a long scope.
Mayor, I can't tell who's speaking.
It's Matthew.
Was that Matthew?
Yeah, he's.
Oh,
yeah,
I
he's
see
calling on
Matthew.
the phone.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Sorry about that.
So the lodge's proposal, or let's start with this one. This one, we reached out to WashDOT for their comments based on its requirements for a SEPA threshold determination. So with that, we asked for what are all the future phases of your project. And so we compel them to be forthcoming. It's not just that they did it. We compel that. And if it meets certain thresholds, then we have to make that threshold determination where we've evaluated the project and we're saying, does this have a probable significant adverse impact on the environment for this 16 units with however much commercial space plus additional units later? That meets the thresholds where we have to do that communication with state agencies, including WashDOT, For the lodge's proposals, those were under the thresholds, and so it didn't trigger that discussion. So that may be a hole in the regulatory process to look at. I know that there are holes within our ability to regulate and to compel property owners to do transportation improvements, where with the water and sewer, you guys have the system development charges and people are paying for their impact on the system. We don't have that for parks. We don't have that for police. We don't have that for transportation. And we don't have that because the state hasn't specifically given us that authority, where they have given that authority to other communities. We don't. There are some things that we've been talking about with Ken as ideas for how we might fill that hole, but it remains a hole as we review this project.
If I can note also, in light of all the traffic impacts that have been generated by the lodge developments, plural, there are constitutional limitations on what we could require this developer to do to manage their own traffic impacts. If it's a cumulative effect of all the properties in the area, and suddenly they are the ones who essentially are the last straw on the camel's back, we can only require them to do what is the impact of their project versus what the impacts of all the projects in the area. So it might, if it's an existing problem, there has to be something called rough proportionality based upon what their impacts are. And so, if something like a traffic light on 14, God forbid, if that's $300,000 or $400,000, probably more, we couldn't force them to pay the $400,000 for that project when maybe they've got 15% of the traffic volume when you consider the lodge and maybe the fire hall traffic. So, I think we have to be realistic about what we really expect this developer to do. Might have been nice over the years if we would have, maybe looked at the lodge, but again, we can't do TIFs, and this is part of the problem Ben just alluded to of our not being a fully planning county or city, that we can't essentially have them contribute set-asides for future projects. So that's a little bit of a challenge for us, but I wouldn't have the expectation, at least, that we could have this developer, or WashDOT for that matter, have this developer fund an entire major development. Some, pro rata share possibly, but not the whole thing. And with that, guys, I got to leave to do the Washougal City Council meeting, so I'm gonna leave. Good to see you.
I can.
So, Ben, you said, so as it's currently written, they would be required to provide a traffic report before any construction could begin.
Before the city council considers approval.
Okay. But then now you've got these alternatives, and we've also talked about a third that prior to, what'd you call it, C of O on the first unit. So it sounds like that we're already kind of leaning towards not holding up the show, but not letting go of the need. So I think it's just, what's the trigger going to be for that report? Is it going to be C of O on the first unit prior to approval of the future phase, or prior to occupancy of a future phase? So what are you guys, what are some of your thoughts on those three timelines? Before first unit of this phase, before coming to talk to us, before approval of the second phase, or prior to occupancy of the next phase?
Oh, go ahead. Is somebody already speaking?
Nope.
Okay. I would prefer to not hold up construction for 6 weeks right now as and put this developer in the rainy season, because I I am a proponent of this project. I do want to see it go forward. But yes, so I say no to the way it's drafted right now, and I'm in favor of condition 2 and or 2A.
I agree. I feel it's very unfair to get stuck with this as being, last kid on the block, as it were. So whatever we can do to minimize this, both from a financial but also a time impact on them, I'd be all for.
Okay, so thank you. And then, Paul.
No, I agree with everyone else.
Okay, so the difference between, like I said, 2 and 2A is.
You don't count, Robert.
I'm fine.
Well, I've heard Robert's thoughts.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't. Doesn't think he matters much anyway. So the language differences, I think, I don't know if I'm reading too much into this at this stage, but we've got prior to approval, prior to occupancy, and then there's a difference in language on the scope of the study within the two options.
So just explanations to help you out, Scott. So
Sure.
2A is numbered just to preserve the numbering of all the conditions that follow. So we're adding one without renumbering. The discussion later about number 14 to 15. So it's considered 2A. It would be a distinct condition within the permit. The discussion about the scope of the study that they're evaluating in the draft here in the staff report, I included the adjacent uses thing to really respond to that fire hall and the potential impacts of this on the safety of fire operations, if fire operations are occurring at the time of development. And then the other components of it, the Rock Creek Drive corridor, its intersections, the termini with Highway 14, I drafted that as just an all-inclusive, but still limited to Rock Creek Drive. Just to give them their expectations, but any of those are subject to change. With 2A, the difference in timing is that before the city council, or more likely the planning commission, if all the changes to the SMP happen before the next phase, before the city or the planning commission would approval, they need to conduct that traffic study at that time. And then once they have an idea of whether traffic mitigation measures are necessary, they have the construction period to do those until occupancy of that first building. So.
Gotcha. Does that make sense? Did everybody catch that?
All good.
All right. So is this something that you guys could approve, these two conditions? So before they submit their plan to planning commission, they have to have their traffic plan in place. And condition 2A says that before anybody can occupy it, it has to be done. All right. Sounds like I see lots of, okay. Anybody have any reservations before we move on? All right. All right. Thank you. All right. Cultural resources. So if it's all man-made.
I read the report. There's nothing there. And obviously it's in the plan I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the comment letter is for any native soils, if they're going below those fill areas, that's where they would need to develop the plan to have a cultural resources monitor on the site. So if they develop their plans and say, we're not going to dig below this, therefore no monitor is necessary, they have that power if doing so can be done within the codes, within the building code. Again, this is just like Robert summarized for the last one with traffic. We're requested to include this condition by Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. We're not compelled to do that unless the court stepped in to compel us. With this one, there's probably more risk of somebody stepping in to ask the court to do that because the tribes are involved where there aren't those interest groups involved in the traffic impact study. So that's for you to consider. Again, the timing on this would be before construction. And so they would have to do that. It wouldn't be a total delay of city council or based on city council's decision. but it would hold them back from digging into any soil there.
What was it? They found bones there at the bridge, what, 5-6 years ago?
I think longer ago even.
Is it longer?
Yeah.
But they believe those bones were brought in when the fill dirt was brought in.
Oh, is that right? I never heard that story. That's awesome. So they were transplanting bones. Yeah, I don't have a problem with deleting the text from the condition.
Same.
All right. Paul says he's fine with that. Matthew?
I don't care. It's fine.
All right. We are moving on. Okay. This seemed to be, well, was the second major point of discussion the other night. So we do have a new proposal for public access. Which one of those documents was it?
The newest from them is H, and then one page before that is what I put together, and what I put together there is an all-in, hey, these are a whole bunch of different public access areas for you to consider, but I'm not anticipating that you ask for all of those.
And then they have theirs on 145, 146.
I mean, so I'm all for, trying to have this balancing act between, it's private property, but you do have this easement and all that. But there's a huge chunk that's being removed from the existing to the new. And so, yeah, that is a little concerning of, if it was bought with the understanding you had this easement going all the way around the peninsula, you got to maintain that.
That southern peninsula there, the one that looks like Florida, it would be difficult to maintain a wide enough path and still have room to build. So this might be a good compromise, or at least the beginning ages of a good, this good jumping off point for a good compromise. So it's worth.
Or maybe it's an in and out. Maybe it doesn't loop. I don't know.
Well, the in and out is what I really want to avoid. A loop, I think, is a much more attractive walkway for pedestrians.
But to your point, if you feel it's going to be too tight to build and have a loop around it, then the compromise being, put a trail on one side, build on the other.
Okay, I get your point there.
Yeah, that's all I meant by it.
One thing that I would like you all to consider in this is that distinction between visual and physical access, and really as a group to evaluate what you prioritize. So their proposal certainly limits that visual access where the public would be able to go along the entire shoreline. If they include the physical access, the legal physical access to the water there, does that mean anything to you? What's more important in that? Is it any consolation for you to get that? It is a different discussion than we'll have with some other projects that don't have a public easement in place. Right now, they're asking for you to approve something different than you already have. So those constitutional issues creep up, but not to the same extent that they would if there were no easement across the property.
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following because I'm having trouble with getting to the right pages as you guys are talking. But I'm on 145 and 146 now. And what exactly can you just, I'm sorry, can you synthesize once more for me what we're talking about here?
Absolutely. Let me get.
Yeah, sorry, everybody.
So if I see it right, 140, because one of them has Dean's stamp on it. That is 144, and the one below it also has his stamp on it. Where's the one that you submitted, Ben?
So the
1.5.
one that has a note, a red note up in the upper left corner is the one that Ben, it's a city prepared public access comment.
Right.
Aha.
And
I
so
see.
I'll just move forward through the documents to show the timeline. So the page 144 is what they initially submitted for discussion about what the council would want to see in their plat amendment process. And so the turquoise color is that perimeter pathway all the way along the water's edge of the property. Their proposal at that time was to limit it from that perimeter pathway to this maroon-ish color
Mhm.
that would come in along the driveway, go out to the point, the eastern point, and then also have an out and back to the northern point. What I've prepared for you to consider, and I prepared this before we got the proposal from the applicant that follows this, but for you to consider would be something different that allows you to discuss the physical state of the trail, paved, ADA access, gravel, dirt. It also considers those different lollipops or loops or what'd you call it, Paul? I forget. Continuous access, and then the physical access. And so with this, there are 3 pink lines. The pink line at the north is one that the planning commission, or Liana, help me with this. A planning commissioner, or Mike, actually you're here too, proposed as a way to have that continuous access. I don't believe that it came as a recommendation from the commission as a whole, though. That's the pink line in the north. There are 2 pink lines in the south. Both of these connect to where the existing easement continues onto the neighboring property. And that's not reflected in the applicant's submittals. And so that's something that I really want you all to focus on in yours, is whether that line comes off the neighboring property and takes a left to the west and goes directly onto the Rock Creek Drive pathway, or whether it does that and it takes a right and goes to the east to connect to the other circulation system. Then within that, there are the different loops and lollipops and out and backs that they propose, which on this would say build this to ADA standard.
Oof.
Finally, the green is where we would ask them to provide legal physical access to the water, where there's currently an informal read, not a legal access, but an informal access that's been used by the public for a long time.
Say, Ben, this is Mike. I know I'm not officially part of the meeting, but I just want to say that the Planning Commission was in general consensus about the need for a more circulatory access versus the out and back stuff by the end of the meeting. We came up with, the lines I drew were in response to giving some more information to Liana, but we did agree that it seemed like the circulatory access was a better idea to more replicate more closely what the existing easement is. So that's all I've got on that.
Yeah, he's correct on that.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. And then on the page that follows is the proposal that the applicant submitted after I prepared that, the one with the pink lines. This one does have the circulatory access up along the north side of the site. It does have some physical access to the water on the eastern portion of the site. It doesn't have anything connecting to that existing pathway off-site. There's 2 different colors on that, and I didn't include his email as a written document in the packet for you. He says that in addition to the trail we already laid out, the green arrows, we will commit to looping the trail as shown in the red arrows, or something very similar, in order to allow access to the water. We can address ADA access to the water once phase 2 construction begins. So the staff report on this, or the decision format for this so far, really is leaving some of these issues to the City Council's review of the plat amendment process. And remember, they're proposing that because the easement is identified on the short plat. and they want to move the easement location. They also want to move some of those lot lines. There's 3 lots that are within the site right now. They want to reduce that down to 2 lots. One of the lots would accommodate phase 1 that they're asking for permission for, and then the other lot would include phases 2 and 3, which they would come for permission later.
Hey, Ben, just on that question, because I'd written that note down, is that a taxing issue for us? So, or for the county or the city? I mean, you got 16 units on lot, what we'll call lot 1. It'll generate its tax revenue. And then lot 2 is only going to have potentially 5 habitable units with a bunch of dead space.
I don't have an answer for that question.
I didn't know if you knew. Yeah.
So something that you said in there made me think that there was going to be additional public access work done on future phases, but I don't see that written here. So I'm not sure what I heard that made me think that, but it almost sounded like phase 3, there'd be some additional work down on that peninsula to go along with the construction. Did I just hear that out of turn?
I think so. Yeah, that hasn't been considered at this point. When I consider this project, and I may be off in this, but when I consider this project, I'm looking at it as a all-inclusive wedding venue. And so people are going to rent out the commercial space in the middle to have their reception area. There's probably the altar on that public access point on the east side of the site. And then guests would be staying in the 16 units that they're asking for approval of right now. Wedding party, honeymoon suite would be on that southern Florida peninsula. And so I'm guessing that's why they're wanting to avoid access there. I don't have that information in order to really do that, but I think that's the intent there. Let the honeymoon happen down there.
Well, I was also looking for access around that phase 3 southern Florida peninsula part. And it was sort of making me think of, I don't know if any of you guys have been around those condos. I think it's called McCormick Pier along NATO Parkway in Portland. They have these condos that are right on the water, and it connects to public trail. It goes through there. And what they have there, which is kind of interesting, is the ability to close gates on either end of essentially this peninsula at 10 p.m. So that's what those folks do in order to provide public access during the day, which connects sort of contiguously from, 2 pieces that aren't, are really public and don't have any real development there, but also to provide privacy to the condo residents and guests in the evening. So I wonder if we might borrow a page, kind of like that, where we can sort of have our cake and eat it too by maybe providing limited access based on hours. Does that sound crazy?
I like it as a compromise.
So I would in my best world, there would be public access to that southern peninsula. I understand why they don't want to do it necessarily. And I'm willing to concede that point. But yeah, Amy, you bring up a good point. There may be a way to meet in the middle there pretty easily.
So the last time I walked that site, the last time I had big dogs that I would take down there, getting out to that southern tip wasn't that hard because there's just the path right there. But the one way to get down to the water was right at the end, and it was really steep. Like really steep. Like if it was any kind of wet, you'd be sliding down more than you were walking down. So I'm trying to find that balancing act between what exists and wouldn't it be great if it was better than it was before, trying to find that sweet spot. So
Hey,
go ahead.
Ben, what happens to parking? So if public gets to use the access and I roll down there with my truck and boat, who regulates that? Are they going to create truck and trailer parking?
I don't have an answer for that right now. I know as a city, we do prevent motorized vehicles, but that doesn't, even if it's your trailer for your canoe or kayak. Right.
I have an armada lately with the COVID going on. So yeah, I mean, I'm rolling up with 6 kayaks and a trailer, and thank you for the access. And now I want to park them.
Russell Navy.
But seriously, it's something I was wondering, just as everybody's talking, it's one thing to ask for public access, and who regulates what that looks like when the public shows up and I'm a hill, and here comes my family and we are taking over.
Yeah, so I see that bit as around the peninsula as being a walkway with view access, but not water access in particular. I like the water access where Ben has it on the map there in the green. I don't know that we need to require it at the southern end of the peninsula as well, but I would like people to be able to walk out there.
I agree.
If anything, just because it's already part of the, their agreement when they bought it as the easement.
Yeah.
Yeah, providing physical water access on that peninsula would be an extraordinary project. And yeah, whatever. In fact, even if there's not an actual boat launch on the property, that might solve the trailer problem. I like the fact that I like where Ben has put the access as well, but that's just more of a, it's not a place in my mind that you would necessarily launch boats, especially not big boats.
Would you be willing, Paul or other council members, would we be willing to give up that green access to the waterway in exchange for more walking path?
I think it's important to keep the access.
I like the idea of access too. The only other question I have is, and obviously they're not required to go by the renderings that Mal Foster showed up with as, you could have this. But is that going to be part of this project? Is that there will be places for people to set in with their canoes, or is that going to completely is not being attended to or addressed at all?
Those discussions are being had right now. So right now there is no legal physical access to the water. If we require that, and it leads to those, pulling the thread for all those different things that you guys are considering.
And man, I wouldn't even expect ADA access on that southern tip, a little bit of gravel, it's just to walk around, keep it a narrow path because it's, narrow enough for building as it is. I don't think it's going to take away very much room. So I don't see that being a real stopping point from a financial standpoint. I wouldn't think. But Paul, I don't build trails, so I'll leave that to you.
And then the scale is kind of messing with me too, because looking at the plan that they just submitted with the red and the green arrows, it doesn't look like you can get very close to the water at all with a car. So if you had a roof rack or had your small army of boats on a trailer, I'm not sure that, on that phase 1 parking, I'm not sure how close that is to the water if you had to pack in your boats. But
well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought my understanding had been that you were going to have to park on Rock Creek or wherever. You weren't going to be able to drive anywhere near it. You were going to have to carry things in. So I guess were we under the assumption that you'd be able to park in their area as well?
I guess I don't know about parking. I just wanted, if that was where you wanted to set in with your boat, because right now it doesn't look like that's very convenient at all. That's a great pond out there to go paddle around in. Where would you put in your boat if it wasn't from there?
Why
Or
would
the
you not
fairgrounds, I
put in
guess.
Rock Creek? Hello, we have Rock Creek on the other side. I mean,
Now, I have put in at the fairgrounds myself.
me too, a million times.
Okay. All right, so what are you guys' thoughts?
My thoughts are on my original vision was not for boats. It wasn't for parking. It was merely for pedestrian access. And I would like to maximize pedestrian access and get it as close to the water and maintain it as close to the water as we can. And with that in mind, I think that Ben's proposal is pretty good. I prefer the left turn over the right. I think I'd have to go down and actually look at the ground to know for sure, but I think I prefer the left turn. And I would prefer to have a loop on the southern peninsula as well, if that's possible with the setbacks and so forth.
Okay.
So do we want both public access to the water and a loop into the southern peninsula, or is it and?
Why not?
Or? I just trying to figure out, try to narrow in to make, so we can keep the conversation moving along. I like the water, the access, the green one that Ben added in, and then the leaving in the loop that we're talking about here, and then with Amy's suggestion that that there was the possibility of closing it down at a particular time at night. And is that something that what do we have in place right now to support that, or is we have to build that wheel?
You don't really have to build that wheel. So the draft decision as it stands says that the proponent shall formalize all easements for public access, and that this may be done through the plat amendment process. So this is where it's anticipating that the city council will have these discussions with the developer, who's not here right now, but they would have them within the context of the plat amendment process, which requires its own noticing and issues. So it would say, we've got it in place in the shoreline permit. We'll make the decision in the plat amendment. And I know that they haven't submitted that plat amendment because they want to know what the city council wants. So this discussion is really helpful in order to give them something that you can approve when you see it. The plat amendment process in part may address one of your concerns, Robert, but it also may not. So plats need to be signed by the owners and include dedication language according to our code. The dedication language, if the train doesn't cut off my internet, the dedication language says that all dedication areas shown on the plat need to include a waiver of all claims for damages against any governmental authority which may be occasioned to the adjacent land by the establishment, construction, drainage, and maintenance of the road. And so what this is anticipating is that the city's responsible for maintaining those areas. I don't know what our expectations are, and we haven't had those discussions at this meeting, but it's something that probably deserves to be fleshed out a little bit more.
So we've got 3 different designs working here. So do we like their plan, but add the water access where Ben has it, and allow for a trail through the peninsula?
And I'll just say their green areas do include arrows down to the water. And so I think that they're anticipating that.
Oh, I see it there.
So also on their proposal, I believe, if I'm reading it correctly, the southern portion of their proposed trail is significantly off the property line. And on Ben's, it's closer to the property line. Am I seeing that correctly, Ben?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, all of the lines of mine are just distinct and take one, leave it one.
Yeah, I prefer the getting close to the property line on the south as Ben has presented it.
So, and then now that I'm looking at the fine print here, it does say on that shaded, like that cross-hatched area, non-motorized boat ramp restoration. So they do have plans for access to the water from that spot.
So is it possible to give them Ben's drawing, but with the addition of a pink line that goes around the peninsula and connects to the left-hand path on the pink?
That would fully satisfy me.
Say it again.
Would it be possible to use Ben's drawing and add a pink line that goes like from the green area or from his blue line all the way down around the peninsula and
Or-
connects to the left-hand pink line?
And I mean, even during those conversations, I mean, personally, I mean, if they didn't want to have all the access throughout the property in the middle,
Agreed.
I mean, that the easement's just on the outside, right? And the public probably should stay on the outside. That may mean they need to make more ADA on certain sections, but it would also be less building, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matthew. We don't need to, the line that goes between proposed lot 6 and existing lot 4, I don't know that that needs to be there. Do we need to have the public going right through the middle of their property with, I mean,
at the same time, they're probably going to need trails or, paths anyway, just for getting around,
Sure.
but
sure, if they want. to put
public
them
probably
in,
doesn't need to
yeah.
be using it. Yeah. Poor Ben, we just destroyed his
No,
sketch.
no.
I see him rubbing his head.
No, it's intended to. I'm trying to process how I'm going to communicate all this to them, or actually first how I'm going to summarize what you're saying. So what you're saying is generally
Stick to the original.
Stick to the original, plus
So-
physical access,
right.
if you will. Yeah. And that there may be some willingness to pull it back out of shoreline setbacks if it is within shoreline setbacks. I don't know which of those areas would future shoreline setbacks. I don't know which of those areas would be within that, or what the future setback would be for that matter. But so I've got a basis, I think, to start with. Connect to the easement or pathway to the south. And this is the pink line. Continue an easement around Florida. Add physical access.
I think they've done that. Feels like by their drawing, unless their drawing is misleading, but I think they've got that.
I just anticipated.
Let's make it clear.
Okay.
Anticipate a new drawing. So, and then continue along in the backyard of all the condos, or the northern condos. Okay. Did you want to have a discussion about which of those areas are ADA and which aren't, or should they all be, or?
Do any of them need to be?
It's your public.
I mean, we have that entire Rock Creek path as ADA. Is it not?
It is, but it probably fell under a requirement due to federal funding or something like that. If this is a private project and you're not taking federal funding, then it's not
I
necessarily.
mean, I think the north half, or sorry, I guess the east half, top of it there. That should. I mean, there's enough room there, and hopefully that could be ADA. But obviously, with limited real estate down in Florida, I could see that not being ADA.
Well, the fact that the assisted living center is right next door, I think a lot of their residents will be out and about for walks, and the better the trail, the better.
Yeah, good point. Okay.
And then it should be pretty easy to get down to the water, even if you have to get a little help to get whatever, if there's sand or whatever that material is. But it feels like if you were in a wheelchair or a walker, you should be able to get to the water.
Kick your feet around you.
So just Peninsula can be non-ADA and the rest of it should be, is what I'm hearing.
Okay, so probably include some ADA lollipop though to address Paul's issue. Sure. Okay.
Do you have what you need on that, Ben?
I think that I do. The other thing that I thought about since I sent off the staff report was how do we know what's public and what's not? And so maybe in the next discussion, talk about wayfinding stones to build into the pathway where it connects to Rock Creek Drive pathway. So, but those are all of those final decisions, I think, as it's drafted, you have the authority to do in that plat amendment process without making any changes right now.
And Ben, do you want to offer them the ability to gate off and close at night the peninsula to make it more palatable?
I'm fine doing that, yeah.
Well, can I suggest that we hold back that offer, and if they ask for it, we say yes?
Great.
And assuming they don't watch this recording.
Bargaining chip gone.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on, right? The last point.
2 more, I think.
Oh, landscaping. All right, so habitat.
Habitat areas, again, this is one that came up both in public comments and that Amy brought up. They've submitted preliminary habitat analysis, and then they've updated that preliminary analysis. In the end, they're going to have to meet our critical areas code, and that code identifies what we consider as priority habitats, right? And a lot of those just rely on state and federal protections, and they ask applicants to do a desk review to say what are potential species or habitats in this area, and then confirm that through their on-site review. If habitat areas are identified and then impacted by a proposal, they need to mitigate for those impacts. And so where this project is right now is that they've submitted the areas where they think impacts will be. Our consultant has reviewed that and said, yeah, these areas do have habitat functions. These areas do not have habitat functions. We agree with you there. The science supports that. And once they get the go ahead on that, then they feel comfortable developing the mitigation plan or restoration plan for this. So those plans we fully anticipate before approving it at the staff level. Again, this is like the ADA review from the building official. This is the review according to the engineering standards in the Public Works Department. The draft condition says you don't have your documents in place right now. Get them in place and get that approval before you go forward. The critical areas code is specific in that way. The Shorelines code does give you guys more leeway. So where that one protects rare, endangered, unique species, this one can be more general. So if you want to talk about other types of species, you can. I've got a condition in here that we had considered adding to the SEPA mitigation measures. And then ran that past the habitat consultant. He said, you know, the Migratory Bird Act doesn't really support that requirement. They talk about harming or hunting birds, and that could be any type of migratory bird. So that's the act that gives the state the authority to require a hunting license. And that's kind of how that is geared. He says it doesn't really relate to the habitats for those birds as they migrate. So that we pulled that off as a mitigation measure. If it's something that you guys want to consider, or if you're not comfortable for some reason relying on the critical areas code to control this, then it's something you might consider adding in among whatever else you would like to add in. I didn't know really where to go. I wanted to provide you somewhere in case you thought well, because there was discussion that the existing program might not be good enough.
And at what point is the critical areas, when are they obligated to perform or be, for that part of approval? Obviously, it's not part of the shoreline. Where does that get triggered?
It's the same sort of two-stage thing I described with the traffic impact. So the draft approval in 9 and 8 and 9, where am I at? Sorry. Nine and 10. So before they're granted their construction permit, the building permit, they need to get their critical areas permit in place. And then prior to occupancy, they need to do all the habitat planting or mitigation that's anticipated. So it's not something that requires city council approval or a holdup, but it does require them to do work before they get their permit.
So I guess what it comes down to is, are we comfortable with the critical areas format to address our concerns that we had on Thursday? So I see some nodding of heads. Does that mean that you feel that the critical areas process is sufficient to address our concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be fine. I'd like to see if we can avoid any offsite mitigation. Obviously, that's always encouraged to keep it on site, but even more so with this one, I think I'd like to see it.
Okay.
Yep, I'm
So
good.
The thing I do call out in here is that since they don't have their mitigation plan in place right now, we can't really evaluate those offsite mitigation options. I did build in here that this permit covers those requirements if they are required. I don't know that they will be, but I do assume that they'll have to do some offsite mitigation. So if there is...
Sounds like affordable housing in exchange.
If, if we want to express our desire in the permit to avoid offsite, then we should find a way to do that.
Best efforts to avoid offsite. Is that fair? All right. Are we checking that box? Habitat.
Habitat, yep. I will add into condition 9 as it's drafted. Applicant should avoid offsite mitigation if possible. However, any offsite mitigation is considered permitted.
Okay. And landscaping.
This one is another one that's kind of gone back and forth and some things crossed over. So the landscaping plan, or the lack of one, the initial submittals, was something that the Planning Commission picked up on and said, hey, what's going on here? And then Department of Ecology also picked up on it and said, usually there's a lot more information on these sorts of submittals. So some of that information would be subject to the critical areas planting plan. Some of that information was supplied after the Planning Commission meeting, and what they supplied after that meeting was also after when condition number 14 was drafted to say to accommodate the Planning Commission's desire for screening. So I didn't want to just give a subjective standard that said, hey, screen this, and then have to make a call to say, nah, I think a little more screening here and there without anything to back it up. So I included the kitchen sink in this to say, here are all these benchmarks that could be included as a permit condition, and wanted you guys to have a discussion about those. So benchmarks from providing photo simulations to prove that the screening would be achieved, that it would be achieved from 2 different sites, that it would be achieved within 10 years. That'll screen 50%, and that was pulled from nowhere. So I really hope that there's discussion on that, and that they should preserve native plantings where possible.
What are we screening? The fact that there's a building there?
From the fairgrounds, because the fairgrounds is considered by the Planning Commission to be an important viewpoint, and the Shoreline Management Program says protect existing views.
Even though we can see the lodge from the road. Okay. Okay.
And so there's that condition that includes all these benchmarks that that would need to be met. There's also the landscaping plan that they submitted. So you guys have those 2 as bookends. Here, do all these, the study and analysis and planning to show what's going to be done, or do what you said you're going to do plus the critical area stuff. I don't know where you guys want to go. I don't know how well the planting plan would satisfy the planning commission's conditions because that wasn't put forward to the planning commission to review.
Well, one thing I'd like to make sure doesn't happen is what's happening or what has happened down at the waterfront, which is that we have a gajillion willows that are going to block both access and view from the path. So if we're saying we want a gravel path for view around the peninsula, let's make sure that we're not requiring plantings that are going to block that view, right?
You're absolutely right. Now the plantings can be, the path can be between the water and the plantings, however, and it's easy enough to do. And I looked at the list of plants they're proposing there, and it looks like they just went to a Washington State Extension website and found a list of native plants and plopped it up there. So they're, you know, they're all good plants. In general, I think that the market, since it's a profit motive going on here, they're going to make that place look nice. It'll just increase their worth. And the truth is, it would be hard to make it any worse. The place is infested with invasive species like Himalayan blackberries and Scotch broom and English ivy and so forth. It's horrible in that respect. So any landscaping is better than what we've got now.
I'm quite content with the plan here that they've proposed.
What's interesting on the plan, though, is they don't show anything down to Florida. Their landscape plan is cut off before the peninsula.
That's phase 3. It'll come in later.
Okay.
So could we require that they remove all invasive species from the site? To Robert's point there, since they don't have a plan for Florida, we can say, okay, you don't necessarily have to plant Doug firs there, but get rid of the blackberries.
Yes, you can. Here's what's in place by policy for the areas that are determined to have that habitat that functions. They're going to have to restore those in order to reduce the buffers to accommodate the development. They need to restore those. Restore those means removing blackberries. So that is many of those waterfront areas, but not all of them. There is not anything by policy that talks about removing blackberries from the riprap that they are saying doesn't have habitat function. And so there's a hole there. It's partially covered. Your intent is partially covered through some policies, but there is a hole for other areas of this site. The other policy or condition that's in here that partially covers what you're asking for, and Robert identifies, is in the first half of 14, the black portion, where it says prior to completion of the project, the proponent shall submit a landscaping or other screening plan for the future development areas of the project. And so as I've communicated that to them, that can be just grass seeding and mowed turf in the interim. That's landscaping, or that would meet my standard for landscaping because there are so few objective criteria. If you want something different related to that, let's talk about it. Let's see where and how and what.
I mean, as long as the blackberries are not in the easement, at the end of the day, if they want to keep blackberries there, to me, that's their call.
Any other thoughts?
I'm mostly good with their plan. And maybe you want to just add a condition, as Robert is suggesting, to, you know, finish it off down to Florida at some point in one of the phases.
You guys are kicking ass about getting through these, and I hear you're running out of steam on it. So I want to congratulate you where congratulations are due. Good job.
Carl's drinking. That's pissing me off.
So on 14 there, where it talks about photo simulations, demonstrating the screening, I've heard Matthew say, no, we don't really need that as long as they implement their landscaping plan that they've now presented to us.
I'd like screenings. I'd like drawings.
Okay.
It's so much easier to visualize with drawings, and they kind of have to do them anyway.
Okay.
I'm totally in the middle of the road on this.
If they push back, I can give up on that. It's not that big a deal, but I'd like to ask them.
And remind me, what's the time frame on it being fully screened?
10 years.
The standard that, or the objective standards that I came with was that within 10 years, 50% of the buildings and rooftops need to be screened from the fairgrounds. That they wouldn't need to go beyond 50%. Again, you know, I'm just pulling out some things that are objective standards. I don't have anything to base those on, other than your judgment.
Didn't Planning Commission ask for less time on that? They wanted like
What
3
they
years,
asked for
5 years or something.
less time on installation of all the public access areas.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so
I mean, like Amy said, it wasn't a sticking point, so I guess asking if they push back, we go with it.
what are we doing? What's the final step? Are we voting on as proposed, or are you gonna dial it in and then we vote on it at the next meeting? I mean, it sounded like he was a little anxious to get something going before July.
Yeah, that's where on this one I need some more. So in this case, where we have it as you shall provide it, we could change that to you should provide it, but then we don't have any ability to require it. If you want to wait for pushback on that, then it's not a decision tonight.
We're talking about the drawings, right?
Right.
Could we include that in the plat? Or is that bleeding too much? Because I knew we were including the path in that. So I didn't know if this would work too.
Here's why I like including the path in that, because the path is moving a publicly dedicated area, and that's what the plat amendment is for. With the landscaping, it could be, it doesn't seem as clean to me.
I'll reverse my thing and just say I don't need it. I don't know how everybody else feels.
Ben, does when you dish up your dinner, does your food touch on your plate? Doesn't seem like you like things to bleed back and forth.
Yeah.
So that's a should, or are we just going to remove that part?
Easiest for me to do is make it a should.
All right.
I'm good.
So is
with
this
that.
something that we can vote on? Are we down to that?
Unless you have other issues, or Robert, if I didn't address all of yours, I think you can.
All right, there's a motion there for you guys to consider. One of you would like to take it on.
Your turn, Paul.
Mute.
Motion to approve the Shoreline substantial development permit for Rock Cove Hospitality Center with conditions as presented and changes as discussed.
Second.
Paul tried real hard for the first and the second, but was having some challenges with the microphone. So we saw your mouth moving. We saw your intent.
You can't buzz in. Can't buzz
So
in.
we have a first and a second. Is there any other discussion? All right, roll call. Robert.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Matthew.
No.
and Amy.
Aye.
All right. That looks like approval. Thank you guys very much for your time this evening. I'm going to
Oh, hey,
go.
just
Thanks,
one-
everyone.
only because I was doing it while we were here, but you know, there's 3 applicants on the permit application. One of them's an entity that's been administratively dissolved. I mean, it's $86 to get themselves back in the game, but they currently aren't a valid corporation in the state of Washington. The other 2, though, are valid, but yeah, the last one's not.
That is not something on my checklist.
Yeah.
Or mine.
Leave it to Robert.
I didn't know if we can approve a permit by an entity that's not validly recorded with the state of Washington. You might want to just mention that to Dean so they'll pay the $86 and get them reinstated.
All right. My daughter made dinner and I'm going to go enjoy it. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you,
Take care.
guys.
Thank you.